Hey guys, I'm Jack Stewart, and I'm going to be talking about the life of Edward Thorndike. So, everything about his life, his childhood, um, everything he did at career-wise in research, and how he influenced our understanding of psychology and developmental research as a whole. So, Edward Thorndike, he was born in Williamsburg, Massachusetts, in the United States on August 31st in 1874. And he died at the age of 74 in Montrose, New York. He grew up with his family there, with his family of five, and he had parents such as Edward Robert Thorndike and Abby Ladd Thorndike. And his father was a Methodist clergyman and preacher, and so before his father devoted his life to religion, he practiced law, and so during his childhood, Thorndike never really felt at home anywhere during his childhood. Um, So, Thorndike developed this sort of shyness and social uneasiness as a child. So, like, there was a lot of moving around a lot. He had to change schools multiple times. Very gifted child. He started high school when he was 12, um, and his parents learned this rapidly, and his teachers also knew this really rapidly. When he was very young, his IQ was increasing rapidly, and so they realized that he needed to take a big step and knew he would start to do great things at a very early young age. Regarding his education, Thorndike graduated from Wesleyan University, which a bachelor's science degree in 1895 in Middletown, Connecticut, which he which then later he continued on his education to Harvard, which he started with his master's degree, and he later had some interest. He had some developed some interests such as French literature and English, but mainly wanted to focus. He started to realize he wanted to focus on psychology. And William James was also a very important part during this time at Harvard. They did a lot of work. They started implementing some work in psychology and working together. He then later, Thorndike went on to continue his education again and went to the University of Columbia, where he got his PhD. He started working with James McKean Cattle and studying animal behavior, which will be foreshadowing later what he will do in his life. But this was kind of this was the beginning and foreshadowing of what he'll be doing later. So he also worked with at Columbia University. He started working with Robert S. Woodworth, and this is where he kind of ended his studying and for his education. Later in his life, he married Elizabeth Morton, um, and he had four children: Alan, Edward, and Elizabeth Francis, and Robert L. Thorndike. So, and side note, his all of his children took their own careers into their own hands and started pursue in academia as well. So one of them earned a degree in psychology, or a degree in physics, and one in mathematics. Oh, and over time, Thorndike started to implement his own theories into the world, and so he mainly focused on animal intelligence, behavior, biology, psychology. Um, he also talked about his theories of connectionism, which we'll be talking about later, and um, he also wrote over 50 books and 500 titles, which are to his name. So, for example, there is many that he published, such as Animal Intelligence in 1898, Notes on Child Study in 1901, the Principles of Teaching Based on Psychology in 1906, um, Man of Nature, Volume 2, There's many other ones that he did publish, but those are just to name a few of what he has contributed to psychology, to research, and to our overall understanding of many aspects that we have yet to understand. So as I talked about earlier, um, so when he started making his own theories, or developing his own theories, there's many that he developed. So, for example, he developed a principle for learning, which was called the law of effect. And it's kind of described as when animals would form a connection between a sensation toward a stimulus and an impulse for an action toward the stimulus based on consequences of the action. And then he also talked about this theory of learning, and which was also known as connectionism, and which can be defined as the basic idea that learning occurs when relationships slash connections are formed between a stimulus and a response. And specifically in this case, the connection is called the stimulus-response bond. So, so as Thorndike was developing his ideas and his theories, he started to align with Charles Darwin more and represented himself as a discipline of Darwin and focused on his work and used it to apply to his own research and his own ideas. So, for example, his interpretations on Darwin's evolutionary theory, he was influenced by Darwin's propositions and combined both aspects of a selectionist approach and his own approach to connectionism. So he was combining his own ideas and Darwin's own ideas, and he was kind of combining them and kind of forming what he believed was the right way into psychology. So which is when he started focusing on biology and animal behavior. And Edward Thorndike, later, as he gained a better reputation, a more notable reputation, he started to use his influence and contributed to education. And he did this with John Dewey by creating versions of how the art of teaching could be transformed into science. So Thorndike had constructed his own vision by combining hereditarian behavioral psychology and techniques of statistical analysis. And so Thorndike wanted to replace the traditional rule of thumb and its methods. However, John Dewey disagreed with how Thorndike wanted to um, develop the educational system or contribute to education. Dewey thought that there should be a more Thorndike's was too progressive, and so he wanted to more focus on a traditional and conservative approach. That he wanted to change a little bit, but not too much, and he thought Thorndike was shaking it up too much. Um, so Thorndike he invested a lot of time and contributed to the educational system and saw an importance in educational science and specifically in laboratories and controlled research projects. And so Thorndike adopted reformist ideals, and intended to use his influence to popularize on his writings on research methods in education. In schools, specifically, Thorndike set rating scales and measured children's proficiency in handwriting, in spelling, in drawing, and in history. And he thought that these were like the basic skills of what should be learned in schools or like what should be focused on as well. And so this is when he developed those rating scales. He also contributed to mathematics by presenting his own theory of primary mental abilities, and which focus on intra and individual differences in human behavior. So moving on, what Thorndike did that was probably one of the most influential things was working with animals and studying their behavior. So In Edward Thorndike's career, working with animals and studying their intelligence and behavior is probably the most noteworthy thing that he has done in his career. And during his early days, he started developing his research as an undergrad at Harvard when he was working and studying chickens. He also, over time, he gathered more research, and after he had left Harvard and started to get some traction in his research, he started to work with many other animals such as dogs, cats, chickens, as I said. He's also tried to implement some research with some monkeys, even. So Thorndike also explained that in his research, the differences between humans and animals, such as our abilities to process complex situations, using using a multitude of tools, such as categor- categorization, generalization, abstraction, and many others. Um, and in this research, he developed the puzzle box experiment, which is one of the most famous aspects of Thorndike's work, which he measured the animal's intelligence through many tasks, such as observing their actions, which would lead them to locating food. And if the animal was successful, then they would resemble humans. However, if the animals failed, then Thorndike would classify them as less developed, and not nearly at the level of what human intelligence is. And so when he attempted to observations, scientific observations for monkeys for the puzzle box experiment specifically, it didn't really work because Thorndike was never really able to design a puzzle box good enough for that animal. So moving on from Thorndike's puzzle box experiments, he also started to conduct work in adult learning. So so he contributed to adult learning for specifically for the U.S. government during World War I, which he worked with many other scientists, and he helped develop the Army beta tests. And there was two major tests that were conducted. You had the Army Alpha test, and then you had the Army beta test. And so the beta test specifically was designed for soldiers that were illiterate, specifically ones that with low reading levels, and those who were poor English speakers. And this made up about 40% of the recruits. These tests included picture completion, drawing, and symbol recognition. So over time, Thorndike's work has been very helpful and has contributed a lot. His work has been very influential in all aspects of psychology, research, um, genetics. It's there's been many categories in research that you wouldn't really expect it to be. There's a lot of examples of how his theories have been applied or have been justification for certain things in research. Um, Specifically, I'll just do one example today, such as testers et al. This year in 2024. They conducted a survey of 82 participants and used a squares-based structural equation modeling. And for their test, they used Thorndike's theory of identical elements to justify their reasoning in the training and application contexts and behavior of this specific research that they are doing. So this is just one example of what um, Thorndike's work has helped with. He has been very influential, such as in his animal research. Many people use Pavlov and Thorndike's research to justify certain things when it comes to animal behavior and what they're doing in their research and how they can apply that. And so Thorndike has been very helpful and is a very good and has been very influential in the research department, especially in the modern era.